Lastly is looking at the conclusion. Here you're emphasizing your key results. And for this section, you want to think about if the reader remembers only one or two things, what would they be? So the conclusion is short. It's either sort of one or two sentences or sort of one paragraph. It should not be much longer than that. It's a very quick summary and your final sort of bite of sort of kind of information for your reader. So it could be either the most significant findings. So if you've got a number of findings, what is the most significant finding? You could include a future study, or you can kind of mix them up a little bit. You want to make sure that your statements are supported by data. So if you've mentioned a conclusion, if you've mentioned a point, then you do need to make sure that the data is there in your report or your thesis to back that up. So again, here is a kind of section this is my conclusion, that's it, a couple of sentences, doesn't need to be any more than that, which is why it makes sense to add it to your discussion and to have a chapter just for like 4 or 5 sentences. So overall, it's a good way of sort of starting off. Overall, I've said, I'm summarizing now, like that's it, I'm done. My data strongly supports, I'm giving a really good kind of phrase there, strongly supports. This as an important activator, work and stabilize. I've given a reason. It appears to phenocopy, so in my case, I kind of described exactly what happens, a short description. In a number of assays, so although I haven't given like all the different methods that I've used, because in my particular thesis I had like 4 or 5 different methods, so I don't need to say in this method and that method, so I just said in a number of different assays, so in all of them. This is what happened, and it possibly, so there's some unknown, so this is where I'm saying it's unknown a little bit, but it possibly activates, so I'm kind of calming it down a bit. In the beginning I said strongly supports, but there I'm saying possibly activates, so I'm being a bit more kind of cautious, suggesting it may have a role in crosstalk. So here's where I'm getting into the depth a little bit. So if you think of your sort of upside down funnel, the conclusion works a bit like that as well. The beginning part of it was quite general, and then as I'm going more and more depth, I'm kind of being a bit more cautious. So I'm saying in the beginning, overall my data supports it, and then later on I'm kind of saying, well, actually it possibly activates it, and it suggests, there's so much sort of hedging talk here, possibly suggests it may have a role. So within one sentence, I have 3 words that are very kind of inconclusive and suggestive. So possibly, in fact 4, appears to, there's appears here as well. So I've got the word appears. So I've got the word appears to. I've got suggest. Suggest is overused in academia. I've got may. And I also have possibly. So those are 4 words that you probably will use a lot when you're writing, just because your results, unless you know for sure, for certain what they are, what they mean, and can explain them, you want to use kind of language that is suggestive and that minimizes sort of the finality of your results. What my data shows, they can see that what it means, they can see the reason, and they can kind of have a bit of a discussion, a bit of an explanation as to what this possibly means. You want to start off with your key results. What is it that you are what's your main thing that you found? What's the question that you're trying to answer? So you want to handhold, you want to echo to the reader what it is that you're looking at. Then you want to respond to the gap in literature. So what is it that you are trying to fill? What is a gap? What is that information deficit? Where's that knowledge that you're trying to gain? Connect with other published work. Find work that relates to yours. There will always be something that you can relate to, and try to find a way of saying that it's similar, it corroborates, it doesn't, it's in agreement with, it's in disagreement with. What is it? How do you fit in? Implications and future recommendations. How is your work important? How can you build onto this work in the future? Issues with the method and the design. So how is it that your work is limited? Where are the kind of flaws? Where are the shortcomings of your work? Explain what they are. give a positive outlook while minimizing your responsibility. And then lastly, the conclusion, you want to finally emphasize, if someone could take away just 1 or 2 sentences or 1 or 2 points away from your work, what would they be? That's what you want to add in your conclusion. And that is your structure. So if you have just 2 subheadings for your discussion, you would just have sort of that layout. If you have 5, you'd include this in all 5. So it's really just a kind of, it should flow quite nicely to that conclusion and that end point. You should kind of go back to your literature review and ensure that you've included all the background knowledge that someone would need to understand your discussion. It's quite difficult for someone to understand everything you've discussed if you haven't given them some background information in the literature review. So ensure that any topics, any main kind of theories that you've discussed in your discussion and your conclusion, they need to be given in more detail in the introduction. So go back, once you've written this section, go back to the intro if you haven't written it, or if you have written it, then think about whether you've included all the background knowledge needed to support the discussion in this chapter.